You have the little thing that goes click.
Yeah, that's why I do the clap, so I can link it up later. All right, we got Nick Smith, the one and only Golden Builder, in the house. We'd love to talk to you about your album that you're making. The tarot aspects, the songs,
Well, I thought we were talking about Aleister Crowley and rock and roll.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can go down that path.
As well. My album is on hold.
Yeah.
My album, certainly, it has those occult elements in the lyrics, which is do people know who Aleister Crowley is? I was thinking, like, maybe we should tell people who Aleister Crowley is. He's a Victorian guy who was born in 1875, and he's a brewer's son, so he's middle class in that, in that milieu in Britain at the time.
What do you mean brewer?
He made beer and sold it, and so he was not wealthy, but he was fairly well off, and he was a member of the Plymouth Brethren, which is this very small Protestant sect that believes that the Bible is the absolute end-all be-all, and that there's no theology and there's no dogma. It's all what the Bible tells you. And Aleister was only allowed to read the Bible until he was 15 years old. And so there's a person that knows the Bible like through and through and through and through. And he received a middle-class education and was queer. And so you could go to prison at the time. And he read this book called Cloud Upon the Sanctuary by von Eckenhaus, I believe is the guy's name, and it describes the fraternity of spiritually evolved people who are guiding humanity, and so he became enamored of this idea of becoming a member of this society, and then he meets this guy called George Cecil Jones, who is a member of the Golden Dawn Society, which is this it's like a bunch of Freemasons who are doing a side pony, who are doing a side project. Freemasons who are into ceremonial magic and tarot and astrology and all of this sort of juicy stuff in Hermetic philosophy. And
so are these the cats hanging out in that hotel?
Hotel? Which hotel?
There was like this hotel that Aleister Crowley was like known for hanging out with, and all these people would come by like...
Oh, well, maybe you're talking about the he had like an ashram in Sicily, but that's way we're getting there's like two things too that are like these touchstones in everything that we're talking about. It's just in 1610 somebody, an anonymous person, released the first Rosicrucian manifesto. It's called the Fama Fraternitatis, and it's this enigmatic alchemical document that sort of announces we are the Rosicrucians. We have secret knowledge and magical knowledge. It's kind of, the document's actually hard to understand, but it's the journey of this guy CR, and he goes to the east and he learns special knowledge, and he comes back and he puts it all in this vault, and after 120 years his followers find this vault. And so when this document goes out, there's this flood of sort of mail coming into Germany, and nobody knows where to send the mail. How can I become a Rosicrucian? But nobody knows who wrote it, and there's no like office. Basically all it is to become a Rosicrucian is you don't wear special gear, like you don't wear a frock to show that you're a priest and you're special, and you don't pretend that you're special, and then you meet every year, and then you don't say that you're a Rosicrucian. That's basically like the only sort of rules. And so this thing has a mystique. It has an occult mystique about it. And so these group of high-ranking Freemasons in the, say, 1870s, they create something called the Rosicrucians in England, because Freemasonry doesn't really get, they do rituals, but it's not this same sort of hermetic stuff. And so they start this thing, and there's this guy, MacGregor Mathers. There's the other guy, Dr. Wayne Westcott, who was the coroner in London. He's a very prestigious, well-known, I have a Masonic encyclopedia, and he's in it. to get in the encyclopedia.
He's touching all the bodies on the
He's
way
like a
out.
heavyweight dude. So, and he knows this guy McGregor Mathers, who's poor, but he spends all of his time in the British Museum mining out hermetic knowledge, and then he's stuffed it into sort of, you know, a system. All this disparate spots, and he took stuff and made a system. And then there's a story that they found what they call cipher manuscripts. So it's the rituals, but in a cipher not written out. So if you have the occult knowledge, you can interpret these ciphers and rewrite the rituals. And supposedly it had the address of somebody in Germany, because the Rosicrucians, Germans, if you're an English person, like the Germans have the real provenance. It's got to come from Germany. And so they invented this woman, Fräulein Sprengel, that's going to give them permission to start the Golden Dawn. And it's like, you know, they invented her. Never was such a person. But they needed to have provenance. It's very important in Masonic circles to have provenance. You know, Luis is the guy. He gave it to me. I got it from Luis. Luis got it from, you know, Miles Davis
Lineage,
or whatever.
yeah.
Right, exactly. Same thing as in music, right? I've touched the stream, the real dudes.
Yeah.
And so Wayne Westcott has the provenance of being the man, and then McGregor Mathers has weaved all this knowledge together into this system, and they write a bunch of rituals, or Mathers writes the rituals, and they open up shop, the Golden Dawn, which is like men and women can join, and it has sort of Masonic elements, but it culminates in doing a ritual where you become CRC, or you know CRC, the guy from the Rosicrucian Manifestos. You go into this vault, and he's in a grave. Then he pops up and says stuff to you or whatever. And
so we don't know what CRC means?
Well, later on they said it meant Christian Rosenkreuz, but it's just CR because it's having to do with Kabbalistic codes. You know, that letters mean numbers, and those numbers can lead you to other words, which gives you it's like gematria. So there's a ton of that in the Family Fraternitatis. And then on 1875, this woman, Helena Madame Blavatsky, who was like the first person to bring sort of Eastern philosophy to like white people, to like gringos. She wrote these huge books and started something called the Theosophical Society, which was so huge. You can't imagine how huge the Theosophical Society was in, say, the 1890s. Like, there was just many people at that time who were members. Like, Thomas Edison was a member, and like Arthur Conan Doyle. The list goes on and on and on. So all these people in the Golden Dawn were Theosophists. And so they've got this thing established. It's been going for 10 years or something. And Crowley rolls in, you know, and people know who he is. He's got a reputation. He's dating a female impersonator. Like, he's, you know, like he's a wild character, and he's, you know, probably a narcissistic psychopath, probably, you know, I'm not a clinician, but, and so he rolls in, and he gets, there's, in the Golden Dawn, there's an inner order and an outer order. There's like 4 or 5 rituals that are associated with the outer order. And then if you go through those rituals, you get the inner order, you get sort of all the spicy stuff, all of the knowledge that you came there to get. And so he rolls through the outer rituals, so he's totally into drugs. Has asthma. He goes to a doctor, and the doctor says, hey, if you're feeling asthma symptoms, just do some of this heroin, and you know, as needed or whatever.
This is like back in the day.
Well, you could buy coke and heroin at the store.
Yeah.
I mean, you go down and buy it. And so he's, you know, being a bad boy, and he's at a Golden Dawn meeting, and he meets this dude, Alan Bennett. And Alan Bennett has been studying magic for years, and he's an expert. He knows how to do ceremonial magic, and he knows how to do all this stuff. And he's broke. He has asthma. He's strung out on heroin, and Crowley's like, I have some beautiful rooms in central London. Why don't you come and live with me? You teach me magic, and I'll give you a place to live, and we'll hang out and party together, which they proceeded to do. And he taught Crowley everything that he knew. So the people in the temple, they didn't want to let Crowley in the club, right? For the above stated reasons, right? He's not middle class. He's not proper. Like, these are English people. and so McGregor Mathers is living in France, and basically, he's being supported by women, the wealthy women that work the Golden Dawn, and he's, Crowley comes over there, and Crowley's like, I have money, and McGregor Mathers is like, you have money? Well, you want to be in the second order? Well, come on down. We'll help you out, right? And so he gives him the initiation in France, and then he's entitled to these documents. And so this shows sort of like Crowley, how insane Crowley is. So he's supposed to go back to London and say, hey, I just received my degree and I would like my documents. But no, Crowley, he dresses up as a Highland chief in his kilt, then he goes and breaks in to the offices, and he steals all the shit. Right? He like steals McGregor Mathers' like half finished book, which he publishes under his own name later on. Then he goes in there, and the cops come, right? Because it's like these rooms that belong to somebody else, right? He has no business being there, but he ends up, the long and short of it, he ends up getting these documents, and he becomes part of the second order, and that sort of unleashes him, because he's a very hard worker. He's a very hard worker. Like, he's somebody that wrote a tremendous amount of stuff, and so there's a sort of side pony that'll get us into the strain that we want to get in. Is he's a mountain climber. He had asthma his whole life, and as a boy, his doctor had said, you should get out and you should climb mountains or something like that. So he's a skilled mountain climber. He was in the first attempt to climb K2, which is like the hardest mountain in the world to climb. They didn't make it, but they made it farther up than any other. And so he goes with this dude, I can't remember his name, some German dude, Eckenstein, and they go to Mexico to climb mountains because they're middle class and they have fucking money. You get on a boat, and the slow boat, it's probably wonderful. And so in Mexico, he's talking about, I'm a magician and I can do this and that, and and the guy's going, can you concentrate for 5 minutes? Because he's into Raja Yoga, of like how to get your mind, like focus your mind. And so Crowley sees that he can't do that, and so with his nature, he like throws himself into meditating. At the same time, he's given magic mushrooms in 1909 in Mexico, right? So he's sort of, that's the first like spark of, there's somebody that takes psychedelics that's has the sort of 60s mentality. He's a hedonist, he's a seeker after truth, when he later, when World War I happens, he's traveling through America, and he goes to Park Davis and has them synthesize mescaline or psilocybin or something like that. And he ends up in New York, and he gives it to a bunch of people, one of which is a writer who wrote up his experiences of tripping with Aleister Crowley, basically. And so there's a schism, and the Golden Dawn breaks up because of egos, and everyone's a fucking narcissist. And then when you're all together, like, it's like, does Lou know more than I know? Lou has more secrets than I. Lou's hanging out with, like, everyone starts, because in every sort of order after that, they've tried to like limit the amount of people that you know. You just know the one dude, or you don't. If there's hangouts, there's always problems, and there's egos, and we're trying to be spiritual, but you're gauging yourself, like when it's like the Buddhist teachings where you're using spirituality to empower your ego and make your ego bigger, right? Which is a thing that happens in the sort of true initiations of the Golden Dawn. You're supposed to, you have Earth, where they're like, give you the handshake, and they're like, you're part of the club now. And then you go do the moon thing, the moon ritual, where you have to sort of, it's about being emotionally grounded and knowing emotionally why you're there and why you're doing your spiritual thing. And then it's Mercury and Venus, which is your mind, your emotions, your desires. That's the last one before you go to the sun and you learn like the true magical knowledge, because your desires can fuck you up, right? That's the thing, that's your Achilles heel. And Israel Regardie says in the beginning of his book that you should, if you're going to be a magician, you should probably get therapy, because you're going to confront, all of this sort of, when the light's lighter, the shadows are going to be darker, and then you're going to confront whatever's unresolved in your sort of, like I'm bipolar, and I'd come up against, the whatever. If you're on sort of a average mean, then you're probably better suited to be a magician. Or if you're a narcissist is great position to be a magician. So anyway, Crowley, to get to the Kefu stuff, he spends all his money because he's an idiot. He's not a businessman, and he when he publishes books, it's the finest paper, gilt, just spend the money, right? And he's not selling a whole lot of books. Like the books that he's a terrible marketer. He wants to be the Maharishi, that's what he wants to be. But he's, a narcissistic psychopath, and he's poison for anyone that's around him. So at a certain point, he decides that he's going to start like an ashram in Kefu in Sicily, and it just becomes a sort of drug orgy. There's heroin. He has this sort of thing that you do drugs and that you have the willpower to do just enough drugs to not be strung out. But like, it's this whole book that he wrote. It's philosophy, and
it's like my 20s.
Well, and there's crazy stuff going on. At some point, they sacrificed a cat. I don't know what ritual they were doing, but it's just like shenanigans. Like I think Crowley knew you don't have to fucking sacrifice a cat. It's pure theater. Like it has nothing to do with like at some point he crucified a frog in some ritual that he was doing. Again, he's a narcissistic psychopath. He has. And his girlfriend Lydia Waddell is naked and she's covered in cat blood. She's like, and the ritual ends. She's like, "What do we do now?" And the one woman there says, "Well, I'd have a bath if I were a wash." Yeah. And it shows like Crowley's thing where it's one of the few people that he actually helped was in Kefu in Sicily. This woman, and he basically told her to go out to the hut and meditate. Go out to that hut and meditate and do your meditations. And he didn't really talk to her, mess with her, really teach her anything, He just went, and she had great things to say about, the whole experience. But everyone else is kind of this horror show. And then Mussolini came to power, and he found out some shenanigans were going on there, and he shut him down. And so I mean,
totalitarians
well, right, and in the drug connection certainly, and Crowley was the one who brought magic into the 20th century. That there's this guy Stephen Skinner who publishes grimoires, and he's going through and finding all these different grimoires in different libraries, and he's translating them in English and publishing them, and trying to piece together like how you actually do magic in the sort of Jewish whatever vein. Like how do you, because it's a fragmented system that's been corrupted because the church was after everybody was doing it, and that it was having the stuff, having the literature could be dangerous. And he says supposedly that Taoist magicians in China, for instance, have an unbroken oral tradition that goes back like 1,000 years. You can find a guy who knows they don't have to publish books, because when you publish books, that's indicating that the tradition is dying and decaying. Somebody's going, oh shit, there's going to be nobody else to teach it to this next person, so I got to write it down.
Yeah.
So like, somewhere in China you could find an actual magician, whereas we don't know how to do, like, our thing, magic is like, has been lost to a certain extent. Like there's a thing where it's a dark mirror. Like they don't say it in the books, but you're supposed to have like a prop where there's a big dark mirror, and you look in the dark mirror and you see a reflection of yourself, but it's blurry. And when you do your ritual or whatever, the blurry image of yourself in the mirror becomes the demon or the angel or whatever, like distorts into it. Like, never actually done this myself, but I've heard telltale. But it's kind of like a modern thing that in my day, when I was trying to do rituals, I didn't know that. I didn't have an oral tradition. I didn't have, I just had the sort of books.
Yeah. And
Crowley, which is, a huge pain in the ass, which maybe brings us to the 60s that there's sort of, he appears on Pepper, on Sgt. Pepper, Paul's masterpiece. Paul went to the rest of the Beatles. I'd like you to get some people that you like. Like, who do you like? and all those people in the back of Sgt. Pepper. And right, Sri Teshvar is on there. He's a great sort of Hindu saint, and there's a couple other sort of spiritual dudes, but Crowley's back there. I'm sure John picked Crowley.
Yeah, I mean,
Probably, but
wouldn't you know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
right. Well, he's spicy.
Like that,
he's so spicy. He's very spicy, and and he's dangerous. He's offensive. He's a misogynist. He's like a sort of Victorian imperialist. When he go these mountain climbing expeditions, he'd be mean to the brown people. He's like the people helping to make the expedition happen. He'd be hitting them, yelling at them and stuff, because he's a psycho, right? Yeah. He's like I forgot. So he's offensive, into our today, like in the sort of like woke, milieu, like this is an abhorrent person, on some sort of all these levels, but somebody that was a pioneer in his field, somebody that was dedicated to certainly like human liberation.
Well, there's something about taboo and like the expansion of consciousness, which like we have to give a little bit of wiggle room for people to.
All right,
what I'm saying?
And he threw himself into. That was the thread that I lost before, is if you don't deal with your desire nature, then you're going to be twisted when you go up and you start using these powers in the higher levels. And I think that he, was, his Victorianism, his sort of sexuality is like sophomoric, like his jokes, and because it's just so, we can't, and, at this point in history, we can't imagine how sexually repressed, like it's shocking, the stuff he was trying to do, the most shocking things. He wrote a book called White Stains, which is his ode to his gay lover. And he literally had to leave town because the police were looking for him.
Because the book was so foul.
Well, I don't know if it was because of that book, but that was, where it's like, you're going to go to prison for like 7 years for being gay. Like, so Oscar Wilde, like, they basically killed him. They put him in hard labor. It's kind of his own fault because he sued somebody. And
wrong person or whatever.
Well, they have different libel laws, and he said, "You said this about me," and then they're like, "You're gay. You're going to prison." It's like he didn't think through. Maybe talk to his lawyer, like he should have, and so Crowley, sort of becomes an icon in certain circles, and the big cheese is of rock and occultism is Jimmy Page and David Bowie. Those are the two, that you could actually see performing magical operations, and Bowie especially is super explicit about, obviously just in certain songs, but more explicit about Hermeticism than any other artist. On Zeppelin 3, supposedly the first few hundred copies or 1,000 copies or whatever had "Do What Thou Wilt" put on it, which is Crowley's, marketing thing. "Do What Thou Wilt" should be the whole of the law. Because Crowley, just as an aside, wanted to be Muhammad, right? Peace be upon him. He wanted to start his own religion, and he used Islam as sort of more of a model than Christianity, right? He didn't, presume to be an incarnation of but he was a prophet, and he, had this friend Edward Kelly who went on to become a member of Parliament, and his sister Rose, he met this woman, they had a whirlwind romance, got married very quickly, and they were on vacation in Egypt, and he has this whole story about him being called by her, and he had to sit at noon, between noon and 1, and then spirit behind him dictated this thing, which is his sort of Quran, his holy book, the book of the law.
So you mean call came to him?
His wife said they're coming for you, or they want you, or something like that. And she went into a trance and was talking magical stuff. And she's a layperson. She's a civilian, doesn't know anything about magic, so he's testing her. And she, tells him a time and place that he's supposed to be there with pen and paper and listen and write down what he hears. And so it happens for 3 days, the 8th, 9th, and 10th of 1909, I think. Crowleyans are going to be pissed. We're not knowing. But anyway, So he produces this book, this sort of enigmatic book that's his Quran, it's his Bible, and you know how Muslims have to face Mecca when they pray. You know, there's this thing called astrolabe that they invented, so you could find where Mecca was. And so Crowley owns this a mansion in Scotland called Boleskine, and you have to face towards Boleskine when you pray in Crowleyan philosophy. And of course, Jimmy Page owned, I don't know if he still owns it, but he owned Aleister Crowley's house. There's a movie called Song Remains the Same, which is a Led Zeppelin movie, and at the beginning of the movie you know see Crowley or Jimmy Page in his bucolic thing. His house is in the background. He's got red eyes. He's in Crowley's motherfucking house. Like, that guy, he's like, I think anyway, he used to be one of the biggest sort of collectors of Crowleyania letters, you know, stuff that he owned, rare books, like, you know, somewhere in Jimmy Page's house, it's like this treasure trove of stuff. But he's a super private, quiet person, really. Like, he doesn't really talk a whole lot. Like, he don't really, he really doesn't. Where Bowie is like, if you study Bowie, you want to know anything about Bowie, you know everything about Bowie. Like, he's just like an open book.
He likes to talk
more or less.
He's a showman kind of the night.
Yeah, and well, it's a thing in your natal chart. It's like a circle, and if most of the planets are on the top, like, you're sort of like, you know, Bowie has every single planet on the top. Like, it's like you're out there to be seen. You know, if every single one is on the bottom, doesn't mean you won't be famous. Ringo's like that, has them all on the bottom, but he's a drummer. No offense, I'm sorry, Ringo. You're the best. You're the best. I love Ringo so much. And so Bowie like had himself photographed as a magician. He had himself photographed in this special outfit in 1976 when Station to Station came out. He did a promo photo shoot where he's on the floor and he's drawing the Tree of Life, the Kabbalistic Tree of Life, you know. And he's so, like, Bowie's so clever. His last album, Black Star, in the video he's seen in that same costume, right? So that links you to the Kabbalistic Tree of Life. And then when you open the record, there's all these little like things that look like Kabbalistic trees of life, but only part of them. And if you count up all the words, there's 42 words. And if you look up 42 in your Kabbalistic geometric dictionary, it means despair, disease, death. Like he's heralding his, but only for those with eyes to see, right? And it's just kind of a little thing. Like, if you spent your life studying all this stuff, wouldn't you have a couple of, like, play a couple games? Because that's basically what a lot of this is. It's called the magical language, and you're speaking through pictures instead of with words, or you're speaking symbolically with gestures. Like in not ancient times, but say in medieval times in Europe, there was all these little signs because people couldn't read or write. And so, you know, there's a little sign above the shop. Everybody knew what that little sign was. And so if the sign appears in art, like there's things in art, like if like you see a painting and there's a glass of beer, it's on the edge of the table, that means that life is fragile and could end at any moment, right? These little things that you kind of, if you look at it, you wouldn't know there's a glass. You have to know that's part of the sort of
symbol.
Western, it's our style, it's how we do things. Like, if you're a Hindu and you become a disciple of a Hindu master, they'll, like, explicitly tell you exactly what's going on. You have 7 whirling pools of energy in your body, and they have little caps over them, and they each mean a certain thing, and this is how you manipulate. You want to, you know, they'll tell you exactly what it is. Here in the West, we don't tell. We keep our cards close. There's 7 lights before the throne, right? You have to know that those are chakras and what they are. You have to find it out from your oral dude that tells you, right? You're only going to see, like, you know, that's where you have the stuff for the people in the pews, and then you have the special stuff for the priests that only the priests get. And, you know, like, the level of skepticism you have to have, you know, like, Crowley will tries to throw a bunch of fantastical shit in your face and expects you to believe it, is it more believable that like there was a special magical guy who was the son of God and he came down to earth and he could fly and cure leprosy and do all these magical things and someday he'll return again, right? Somebody was born of a virgin, or that somebody who knew a lot about Jewish theology wanted to have a new type of Jewish theology, and they invented this character and they wrote these theological like works, and they started the ball rolling, but of course you're going to tell people in the pews that it's a real thing, but a Catholic priests know that there's possibly there was a guy named Jesus, possibly a 1 in 3, that there was.
But it doesn't matter if he existed or not.
What if we're talking about is esoteric knowledge. That's the whole, that's what, when you're a young person, that's one of the things a friend of mine said once, is that Crowley preserves spirituality for teenagers, right? If you're a teenager, you want to be special, you want to be rebellious, you want to, be seen as slightly dangerous, to be somebody, right? I can control the forces of nature with my powers, right? It's a very sort of teenage thing, and then many people, I think, who become attracted to occultism maybe don't have a whole lot of power in their lives, And then again, you've got these other people, supposedly many people in the military, especially the Air Force, high-ranking Air Force members, Freemasons, magicians, like those, people with high status and stuff do this type of stuff. It's like the QAnon thing. It's like seen through this weird filter lens. Like, sure, there's some rich people who probably molest. Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
But what they're afraid of is this Illuminati thing where there's an elite group, right, who's got morals that are different from your morals, and they're going to control you, right? It's been a thing since they wrote the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, right? Somebody, anti-Semitic person, wrote this thing, and if you're of a certain bent, you read it, you're like, oh my god, and you become terrified. Like QAnon, like you get in, there's this thing, I can't remember what they're called, but they're a type of game that people play. It involves the internet and partly the real world and partly narrative. You're like a spy or something like that. And so QAnon is one of these games, but people think that it's real, right?
It's hard. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. It's like the initial conspiracy theorists were like hippies in the 60s and like MK Ultra and like the acid test and stuff like that. So now it's weird how things have been shifted, and even in like early 2000s, like with the Bush era and the war in Iraq and all that, and 9/11, it's like it was kind of like leftists who were like, there's something wrong here, this is something weird, something going on up there. But then I feel like at some point the internet just got flooded with ridiculous ones to kind of like, I feel like that was like a defense tactic of theirs, because they were like, you know what I mean, just to make the real ones look.
Well, if you're talking about occultism, at a certain point you're going to talk about mind control, because mind control and occultism and drugs, they say sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It's really occultism, drugs, and mind control. Those are the three things that, in spycraft, it's all about mind control, right? All of this stuff that's sort of going on. What you were talking about is conspiracies was an actual thing that happened. A man was shot, and there's a dispute about who shot him. We all saw the film, right? Or whatever, there's a conspiracy, like the Federal Reserve. It's something that happened. You can point to it. It did bad, bad things, right?
Once they get blended in, it's like flat Earth and all that shit. Then it's a way to make them all go away.
Complete, what does fucking Biden say? Malarkey. That's what he fucking says.
Malarkey.
It's just complete, it's like the Scientology thing where I'm a science fiction writer. I just pull this shit out of my fucking ass and I tell people, and people are already brainwashed, and they come to me when I tell them the final thing of Xenu, and they're already been brainwashed, right? All that stuff in L. Ron Hubbard. There's a thread where there's this guy, Jack Parsons. He's involved in starting the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, which is a very famous, especially post-war, you know, because it was involved in, you know, missiles and nuclear stuff and high-level stuff. And this guy was a Crowleyan, right? He lived in Pasadena. Supposedly there's letters, like he got some sort of provenance from Crowley to start an OTO in California, which he did. And they partied hardy. His house was notorious because they would do the rites of Aloysius, which is, you know, these rituals, planetary rituals that Crowley wrote, and then they would do a Crowley sort of mass. He wrote a mass, a sort of, you know, quasi-black mass, where there's a beautiful naked woman on the altar instead of the host, basically. But they didn't go all the way. A real black mass is where you take the host and you put it inside of the woman and eat it out. That's a real black. That's really? That's a real black mass.
Wow.
But the host has to be consecrated. It has to be genuine. And so, you know, he kind of went insane and thought that he was bringing the sort of like Christ baby into. I don't know. There's a whole thing. He kind of went insane, and when they went to start the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, like he kind of was edged out because, like, dude, you're weird and everyone knows what you're doing, and so you've lost credibility. And so he ended up blowing himself up. He was doing a pyro work for Hollywood and stuff, and he was cooking something up in his garage, and poof, he blew himself up. But probably the government just had him disposed of because he's like a loose cannon. Sean Lennon wrote a song in 16 about Jack Parsons, and he mentions Crowley and he mentions the rites of Aloysius in the song, which I was very impressed by, that he got that stuff in there. And I lost my train of thought.
Sean Lennon's a trip, huh, man? You see some of the stuff he writes? Like, I follow him on Twitter.
I indeed. When I was a little boy, I loved John Lennon very much. And if you'd seen me when I was like 7, it was like, "Hi, I'm Nick. I'm going to meet John Lennon someday." It wouldn't be that quick, but I would tell you. Tell anyone who would listen. Someday I'm going to meet John Lennon. When he was shot, it fucked me up super hard. But anyway, my wife bought me the meet and greet when I went to see Claypool Lennon Delirium, and you know, and when he came out of the thing, I was just like, I was like a deer in the headlights because he looked so much like him, you know. And he had this hat on with a third eye, like a captain's hat, and I couldn't like deal with like asking him a question or anything like that. But
you're just like,
but I got to meet the kid. Well, my daughter had made pictures for Les and him, and she was kind of standing off to the side, and people were asking their stupid questions about the Beatles or whatever, and Les, who I will love forever, like looked at my daughter and she said, "Do you have a question, my dear?" And she's like, "Do you receive gifts?" And I think they said, as long as they're not dangerous. And so she gave him the pictures, and then Ellie was like, I just completely broke down, so I had to like take her aside. But this incredibly well-dressed hipster came up to me, and he's like, "I'm sure Les will like actually put that on his wall." Like, he knew that. Like, okay, dude, he was really well dressed. Like, you can tell, and people are like an upper level of like spending $1,000 on their outfit. Right. I was just thinking it was Stella McCartney. Stella McCartney shirt is $500. $500. You have to be on an upper echelon. And so the Peppers, or not the Peppers, the Peppers. Those Pepper guys, they did an album called Blood Sugar Sex Magic, you know, which they never would have known about, you know, if it wasn't for Crowley. And there's a thing that was his kind of like special sauce, was this sex magic thing. There's this German dude, I can't remember his name, but he invented the OTO, which is basically masonry with sex magic. Masonry and sex magic together. And Crowley published this book where he was basically, if you had eyes to read, was saying that he knew about the secrets, you know, of sex magic. And so this guy contacted him and said, "Hey, do you want to be my man in Britain and do an OTO chapter over there?" And of course the Nazis came up and they closed down all the Masons and all this stuff.
No sex magic here.
And yes, and so that became the sort of organ that came down. You know, here in Portland there's an active OTO, and you could go and be a member of the OTO if you want to. But the whole idea for me, as an old timer, of like an orthodox religion, Crowleyania, being an orthodox religion, is just, I mean, I know that they got to make their little buck and everything, but it's kind of ridiculous. Just a tiny. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry, but it's just a little. Well, especially his sort of attitude. He doesn't take anything motherfucking seriously, and then what he puts on the table, you know, for you to swallow, basically. You're more, you know, the Mormon thing. I have special books, but I gotta look through the stone. Nobody else can see them, you know, like that type of thing. Where it's like, okay, like I can, you know, certain people would buy in. He created this whole tapestry of stuff instead of teaching just the nuts and bolts that people wanted, because he was a narcissistic psychopath. There's this guy Case, Paul Foster Case. He's like just quiet, mild-mannered, you know, that just wrote these lessons. And, you know, somebody that's like a normal, you know, today, it's so funny, things are so, I'm 52, and it's impossible to keep up with all the music. I try to keep my hand in. I looked at this thing, the Lizard Gizzard, the Wizard Lizard Gizzard, and I
there's so much. Everyone can just make it.
I was wondering if they were into occultism or not. There's a little aside about Adventure Time, and people like Adventure Time out there, is that there's a lot of, like, if you study Kabbalah or alchemy, like, you're like, oh my god. I mean, it's actually so cool because you don't see that on television. I've been floored by that show. Like, you know, like, okay, they're doing that, and they pull it off so wittily, and, you know, and they manage to sneak in. And again, they're not saying anything explicitly. It's in the back, you know, it's in the background. Because there's things in Western occultism that are called blinds, where they give you knowledge, but they don't want to give you all the knowledge, right? They hold back some of the knowledge. There's a blind, like tarot is famously, you know, blinded. If you buy a deck from the 19th century, it's got barely any of the modern stuff that they've allowed to whatever, the masters of tarot or
like
whatever.
The explanations and stuff, or?
Well, no. For instance, there's a card called Temperance, and if you look at the card in the Rider-Waite, that's kind of another thread. Is this guy Waite? Crowley mercilessly teased him mercilessly throughout his career. And he was involved in putting out the Rider-Waite tarot deck, like sort of if you think about it, a layperson thinks about tarot deck, like the tarot deck. And Crowley as well put out a tarot deck, which, you know, it was put out in '69. And so those two tarot decks through the 20th century, and the latter part of the 20th century, it influenced like everyone. And so in the Temperance card, you see an iris plant in the background. An iris, if you know Roman mythology, is the goddess of rainbows. And so what you're supposed to see is a rainbow in the background, but they felt that was too explicitly talking about this very secret ritual thing where you go from the second order to the first order, and you go through, it's too complicated, Kabbalistic, but they didn't want people to put two and two together, and so you put in, so like I said, the stuff in the Bible, you know, is you know, a lot of times is blinded. And, you know, like, why do we have the Bible that we have? Because the Catholic Church made it for you, right? All these disparate books don't have anything to do with each other. There's a bunch of theology, you know, doctors of theology that got together, and they're like, okay, this book's in and this book's out. And you know, and they all got together and decided. And so now, hundreds of years later, people think that the Bible is the absolute word of God. These people are all Protestants. The popery is like the last thing that they want to be involved in, you know. But where do you go to find the word of God if you don't go to the Bible, right? And
well, people start turning to psychedelics, you know.
Well, and that's you know, brings us to the 60s, is that all the stuff that Crowley was, Eastern philosophy, drugs, pushing the boundaries of consciousness, sort of new ways of living, you know, being sort of like a rebel, and, you know, and sort of all those ways. And I'm sure that there was many people who were influenced by Crowley, read Crowley. It's an incredibly difficult hobby. It's a middle class hobby. You need space. You need a room. You need, you know, robes and swords and cups and like I mean, if you're poor, whatever, you can do magic. You can make do cup like I got from McDonald's. That could be the most sacred magical cup if you do your magic right. But it's a very sort of inherently right wing thing. Like it's on the sort of like right wing, like established conservative. Crowley was pro-life. You would think that he would be sort of more on the liberal side, but no, he was not. It's like J.R.R. Tolkien. You read the book.
You go back 100 years and everything's like...
Yeah, right. You read Lord of the Rings and you think this guy's a hippie, he's an environmentalist, he's into trees or whatever, and when Franco took over Spain, he backed the fascists, right? Because he's a Catholic. He's a conservative, he's not a, he's a Victorian. They're just so different than we... and that thing of Eastern philosophy that the Theosophists started the ball rolling, and then by the 60s, it had, certainly by the 80s, like Eastern philosophy when I was a little kid was normal. It wasn't weird or exotic at all. There was a self-realization fellowship. Me and my dad used to go and meditate, and that's Paramahansa Yogananda, by the way. That guy, there's a guy that's says a bunch of wacky stuff that's hard to believe, but then he's got a bunch of great. He basically just teaches you how to meditate. Like, if you want to learn how to meditate, there you go. This is how you meditate. And it's hard work. It's like I was just saying, it's like incredibly hard work. That's why you don't get like a Bowie's really strange, because especially if you're a musician, being an occultist, like it's a time-consuming hobby. I heard a story once where Crowley was having Bowie, like my boy David Bowie, was having a meeting with the director about possibly doing some sort of film, and this is when he's like strong, completely strung out, and he is smoking cigarettes. He's chain smoking while he's there and putting those cigarettes in the ashtray, and he sees there's these Enochian watchtowers, which Enochian, there's this guy who was John Dee, who was Queen Elizabeth, the old Queen Elizabeth in the 1500s, her astrologer. He was like a spy and a bunch of different things, but he invented this sort of, it's a really complicated story, this type of magic, and there are these figures with a bunch of letters in them that are colorful, and so Bowie spots these, and he leaves, thank you for the meeting or whatever, and he goes out, and he starts thinking about it. That fucking guy, he's fucking got the fucking Enochian fucking things in there. That guy's a magician. He's got my motherfucking cigarette butts. He can take my saliva, and he can fucking use it for voodoo purposes. So he has his assistant come back into the office and pick up the cigarettes one at a time, right?
You can't be messing around
when you're,
with
right,
when you're you know what I'm saying?
The dipping, sort of magical thinking, occultism, and just like tons of drugs. And then you just like start, like a lot of these, like chess players, there's a lot of these magical guys that kind of go insane. Well, a lot of them are narcissists to start out with, and I didn't know about narcissism when I was a kid. Like it's a killer. I mean, Trump taught us all like narcissism's a bitch. It is a bitch.
Yeah, like he almost like
you cannot medicate for that shit.
He almost like ruined his own presidency just because they gave him a Twitter profile. Like if he would have been hidden away and just couldn't speak as much, like
truly
people wouldn't have known maybe.
Yeah, there's
just like hidden for a while.
There's a guy on YouTube called HG Tudor, and he's a narcissistic psychopath, like a high-level narcissistic psychopath. So he knows what he's doing. Whereas an unconscious one will be doing all these things to control you. He'll do something and he'll be like in his head, like, that's right, you little bitch. You're a controlled little bitch, aren't you? So he knows, he's on this higher level and he knows exactly who and what he is. So he's created this website where he tries to free people that are victims of narcissists. Like if you want to, you can pay him money and have a consultation where he'll help to free you. And then he teaches, like, but then he's, narcissists, fuel control, residual benefits, and character acquisition, right? They bolt pieces of other people's character onto themselves, right? But he gets all of those things while doing this sort of altruistic good thing that no narcissist would do. It's like, it's fucking brilliant. It's insanely brilliant. And he teaches you little 8-minute videos or 20-minute videos. He likes to pick on Meghan Markle because she's a low-level unconscious narcissist. And when I've been listening to these things, and we were going to have this talk coming up about Crowley, it just became just super apparent. Here is a very high level, psychopathic narcissist who has no feelings, he has no emotions, he has no empathy, right? But he has drive to get the prime aims, to get fuel, to get character trait acquisition and control and residual benefits, right? The chocolates and the sweet, poontang and all the residual benefits. Like, think about Meghan Markle. She put her claw in this, dumb, guy who's a prince, and what does she do? She drags him away from his family. She isolates him, right? And then it's all about her, right? Everything it's where she's a good sort of target to explain narcissism.
Yeah, where you can watch the videos and go back.
And he's like relentless. I think he has like almost 100, but it's like Meghan Markle 90.7. Where he's just, he's just relentless because he's British, and I think, British people hate her particularly. It doesn't even matter. She's boring. The point is that she shows, and Mathers as well is a narcissistic psychopath. So, these people with grandiosity, a sense of entitlement, a sense of need for control. Magic is like a perfect place, right? For that, I'm the greatest magician that's ever, Crowley.
Something you don't.
Crowley truly
come to me to get it.
Probably did rituals that nobody else had done in 1,000 years, in 2,000 years, right? Just taking them seriously and really doing them, where, the sort of impetus to do ritual has been, in our modern world is stunted, but it's like, the hunger for, procreation or food or anything else. We hunger for ritual, and like pretty much, when you're a kid, you get a birthday and you get a cake. That's a ritual. And pretty much in our culture, getting married is the only time where you do a full-scale ritual. You buy special clothes, you have special shit, you go into a special fucking room where supposedly God lives, so you can say special things, and then you take off your stuff and you go back to your normal life. And, what you're trying to do is ritually seal the bond, magically from this, like, higher level. It's
You're like, we're gonna fight a lot in the future. We need some help.
Well, right. Well, the magic spell. It's like, that's the whole thing with Jesus. Is Jesus' spell lasts forever. The Jews, they used to come and they would take an animal and they'd kill it, and that would be a spell that would take away the sins of the people for 1 year. But the thing only lasts for a year, right? And so these modern theologians, there's a scene in the Bible where Jesus comes to a tree and he says, "Make thou food," and the tree doesn't do anything. And they tell you explicitly in the Bible, it was not the time for that tree to make fruit. And then Jesus says, "Make thou food." And then he goes away and he goes to the temple and he turns over all of the tables in the temple and he says, "You guys are a bunch of money-changing assholes." And then he comes back and the tree is withered, right? What that means is that the tree represents the temple cult, which is this, dying institution. And the early Christians wanted to take that out of the placeness of the temple to where it could be a lot more egalitarian. And then you create this lamb, you create this fictional lamb who, when you sacrifice it, is a spell for all time, for all the people, that will redeem the sins of, and then it's much quicker, it's much easier. We don't have to do all this stuff.
All this stuff.
Well, yeah, right. And we can get across our theological points. And if you read the Bible, I mean, it's like there's points in the Bible that match the points in the Old Testament, like one for one. If you go through it, they're mirroring the stuff that they know. Like, they all knew the fucking Bible like the back of their hands. Like, these are people that live and breathe the Torah every day, all day.
Yeah.
Like, they knew what they were talking about, and so they weaved it's like a theological. It's like a craft. Theology is kind of like a craft.
I feel like it's almost like so we're directing a movie and we get together and we say, okay, we've got all these scenes, and you saw the original movie, but we're gonna remix it. So it's like, and cut it down a little bit, but it still has to tell the same story. So what scenes can we pull out to, like, you know what I mean, make sure the story doesn't, like,
that's why they're all different. Basically, all the gospels are Mark. Like, Mark is the first gospel. Mark is the only gospel. All the other gospels are maybe John. John is just so fucking weird. It has a bunch of Neoplatonism and weird stuff that the other ones don't have in it. The whole idea of the Logos and the Trinity and all that come from John, and like that's all like sort of later. Thomas Aquinas and stuff did all that, like this, where you take Aristotle and you smush him into Christianity, whether it doesn't fit or not. That round peg is going to go into that square hole, whether you'll like it or not. Yeah. So it's funny, the Maharishi kind of comes in because of this quest for spirituality, right? You do psychedelic drugs. There's this book called Acid Dreams, where this guy talks about the CIA's involvement with LSD, that, you know, you get this drug, it's colorless, it's odorless, it's tasteless, the tiniest a microgram, 100 micrograms can, like, incapacitate a person for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's you know, like, seemingly the perfect drug for the intelligence game, right? Seemingly, it's like, how can we use this, right? And the first time they tried to use it, there was a high-ranking sort of Air Force officer, and they gave him LSD, and he released some secrets, and then in the next day he didn't remember that he had talked about their secrets, and they're like, aha, this is it, this is the fucking run, this is the drug, and they start, you know, messing with it, and they realize that, you know, the person can think that they are God and, you know, resist the interrogator, or they can go catatonic, or they can just get really scared and not talk, like you don't know what's going to happen to somebody. And then there was this guy Gottlieb, MK Ultra, the guy that ran MK Ultra, and like they were all dosing, right? All these CIA guys, the classic, you'd be his sort of assistant or one of the guys in the program, and you'd come in, you'd have your cup of coffee in the morning, Gottlieb would stick his head in your office door and go, you're going to have a great day today, buddy. We just dosed you. Write down some notes, you know, in 15 hours when you come down, I want you to write some notes for me or whatever. And like, that's how that dude ended up dying, as he was in the intelligence community, but he wasn't an operative and he wasn't involved directly in the program. He was working with some of these people, and they had a meeting, and they had drinks after the meeting, and one of these guys dosed the drinks, and this guy is like a fucking normal fucking guy, you know. You dose somebody, it's like, it doesn't even know what it is, and you know, he supposedly was going to talk, he was going to say something, and so they threw him out a window, you know. I mean, because we're in the intelligence community, you don't talk. Like, that's what you do. You shut up and take it. I mean, you want to live or do you want to be dead? Like, so, you know, they were doing these, they would have parties, supposedly they had parties at the CIA, you know, headquarters in Langley at some point, like in 1955.
Yeah, before people
they were having, right?
It
and so by the time, you know, whatever, Jerry Garcia took LSD in 1964, Casey took it in 63, I think John Waters took it in 62, because he stole it from a hospital. So there's these seminal people who are in the early 60s who are sampling, like there are these guys who go to these government programs and receive LSD and stuff. The Beatles taken in 65, right? When all the sort of cat is out of the bag, and just like the intelligence community, every musician who becomes exposed to it is just like, this stuff is just, I mean, it's magical. Like it's you know, there's so much potentiality in this. Like you know, Paul McCartney said in an interview, if, you know, the heads of state and important people took LSD, that it would solve all the problems in the world and peace. That's not the way it is. It just magnifies, like if you're a sort of, you know, Nazi or whatever, you like to take LSD, you're just gonna, right, you're just gonna magnify like what you already are. There was a guy, the guy who started Time magazine, and his wife were LSD enthusiasts, and they were like, you know, super right wingers. They thought LSD was great for the right people. I mean, in the 50s it was like this, you know, Aldous Huxley thing. There was like rich people and like nicely appointed rooms with roaring fires, isn't that the rabble? And so the sort of cat had gotten out of the bag, and the hippies came on the scene. The intelligence community had already gone backwards and forwards and up and down, and had looked at it from every angle, and we're done with it. And some of us believe that, the FBI's fucking job is to fuck up the left. If you start a leftist organization, one of your fucking members is going to be an FBI fucking agent, right? And so they're like, well, why don't we just flood the fucking market with fucking, this cheap LSD? Possibly Owsley was working with them. You never know, because intelligence is intelligence. And Owsley is the guy, like Jerry Garcia paid $20 for his first hit of acid in 1964, and I looked it up. That's $179 an hour that he paid for his first hit of acid. And Owsley sold his acid for a quarter, or 50 cents, or $1, never more than $1. And undercut the mafia, and undercut anyone else who was making LSD wanted to charge you $20. Well, I can get the best LSD in the world for 50 cents. So why would I pay $20? And the whole idea of LSD is it's ideological. You can't make that much money off of it. You make it because you want people to take it, or you think people should take it. You
want to affect the culture.
It's like, it's sad. You can't get LSD. Well, it's like, you can't get LSD. Like it's very, very hard to get real LSD. You get some Chinese something. It's not LSD.
Yeah. It's
some sort of hallucinogenic that makes you feel like shit.
Honestly, there's now that people started making with like the what is it called?
MDMA?
No, not MDMA. I almost said that, but 2CE and all that stuff. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't even know. Stick with mushrooms, kids. Stick with mushrooms,
exactly.
God.
That's what I'm saying.
That's right. God made the mushrooms. Government can't fuck with the mushrooms.
Exactly.
Not enough money in them. The mafia can't be in mushrooms. There's not enough money. The mafia doesn't want to fuck with fucking bulky mushrooms are. It takes all this time and care to fucking make them and stuff. We want meth and fentanyl.
There are some fools putting out lots of mushrooms. There are some fools. I may know some.
Yeah, right. It's sad how things have become. Burroughs talks about, basically the opium epidemic, 70 years ago or whatever. He presaged the opium epidemic, and that there would be a drug that's so powerful that you would become totally addicted with one dose.
Doesn't that weird you out though? It's like, I don't get why people, I mean, maybe if you're like trying to escape life, but it's just like, you just want to be like gone?
Well, a lot of people get caught. My mother had an ulcer that exploded. It was kind of her problem because she didn't like going to the doctor or whatever. But it exploded, and they cut like half of her stomach out because it was 1973. They didn't have the tech that they had. She had a scar like this, and she became a morphine addict in the hospital. They had her in there for, I don't know, a couple weeks, and they were giving her, because it was the fucking 70s, they were giving her like, the woman's in pain, give her more morphine. And so she was strung out when she got out of the hospital, and then doctors kind of felt sorry for her. They were like, you're not dead? Like, okay, here, have some, whatever, the pills that I used to take when I was a little kid. There are these pills called Doradin. They don't make them anymore. They're a hypnotic. It's not a barbiturate. It's a hypnotic. Like, it puts you in this very strange opiated state. But I mean, my mother is a perfect example of a precursor of the opioid addiction, because when people are in pain, right, if they don't understand addiction, they don't understand what, opioids do to your brain.
You just want it to go away.
Again, there's the mind control thing. There, I can, manipulate you because you don't know the facts. And then you're caught, and then you're a junkie, and you might go buy heroin because you can't afford oxycodone anymore, and you're in pain. It's a problem. Like Prince is a perfect example. Not a person that took a lot of drugs, I don't think, or barely even drank, but he would jump off and jump off the risers from like 15 feet and do the splits and come down on his high heels. Over and over and over and over again until he was just a mess and he couldn't function anymore without dope and stuff. So, it's partially the fathers, like the people in the corporate sort of world, they've just gone insane, and we're going to become like cattle at some point. Like the fact that nobody's being punished, the Sacklers and, you know,
the pharmaceutical
there's like nobody's being punished. It's like the Jeffrey Epstein thing. It's like, you know, it's so tongue-in-cheek. Oh, he hung himself, you know, a little devil, you know.
I saw this meme the other day. It was like, Ghislaine Maxwell, 19 whatever, she was born to a week from now.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, and it's a thing that mind control and intelligence agencies, right? They were on these hippies. They did not know they were being watched. They were being manipulated. They were being fed whatever drug. It's like, oh, we've got crack now. It's the thing. It's like, here, we got, you know, this is gonna, you know, the last thing we want is people organizing, banding together, thinking, you know, the way things are, like, really aren't that great. What if we were to change things, right? You know, no, here, have this, right? Like, because most people, you know, aren't sophisticated enough to you know, use drugs properly. You know, drugs, you have to have willpower, and you have to know when to say no and when to put the fork down.
Well, and there's a magic of its own, just you know, developing a relationship with each plant. I'll call them, because those are the ones I like.
Well, and that's the thing is plants, because when you get into powders and there's a thing called tartarization. When you make something a white powder, it's become poison, right? At that point, and like, you know, it's you can do those type of drugs, but it takes incredible, you know, skill and willpower and foresight and stuff. Like, there's a guy I saw recently, he's a college professor in New York, and he's advocating that all drugs should be legal and anyone should take any drug they want. And he said it was very difficult for him to come out and say that he likes to do heroin. Like, he likes to do heroin. But he said, I do heroin like every couple weeks, every month, whatever. I get up, I do my job, I don't bother anybody, I don't end up strung out. You know,
for sure.
Like, when adult people should be allowed to do what they want to do.
Absolutely.
And like, there's a Crowley thing where he has this rights of man, where he says, you know, man has the right to do what he wants, and to like write what he wants, and to paint what he wants, and to etch what he wants, and then it's the punchline is, and man has the right to kill those who thwart these rights.
Bro, wait, what are you talking about? So okay, I just gotta bring this up. I've been having this crazy like Twilight Zone. I'm like, I swear to God that the right and the left want the same thing.
Oh, sure.
They just speak different languages. Because what you just said is the First and the Second Amendment.
When you get to the edges, it's very, very, very similar. When you're in the middle, it's very, very similar. Like, it's so similar. They had a thing on Daily Show where they were talking to leftist people, and leftist people had their leftist reasons for not wearing a mask and not getting vaccinated. It's not that I want to be free. It's like, my body's a temple, and I, you know, like... they have some other cockamamie reason where they can't, you know, play ball and be a fucking team player, and, you know, like if a couple of us drop dead because of the fucking vaccine, then you took one for the team, because we're trying to like move on with our fucking lives. I just don't understand where, like, fucking polio. It's like, kids, polio used to be a thing. Like, you were a little boy in school, one of your friends get polio and fucking die or never be able to walk again. Not one fucking kid in my fucking school got polio. Not one. And because there's vaccines that we all got.
But bro, can I say for a second though, it's like Aleister Crowley, MK Ultra, and then all of a sudden, like, the pharmaceutical companies are like pushing this vaccine on everybody. Like, I definitely get the sickness argument, but like, I'm not.
Well, sure. Like,
I am one of those hippies who's.
Well, I get it. You know what? And I respect that, but I think that, you know, that the people that made the vaccine they're not putting a chip in it. They're fucking scientists. They're you know, like, and the reason I got vaccinated is I feel like if I could help somebody else and not get them sick, that's my. But we all take precautions, and the precautions that we take,
Well, you know, like, I obviously care about other people, you know? So it's like the argument of like, well, you have to do this if you care about other people. It's
well,
like,
no, you can wear a mask and take precautions. Yeah. I mean, certainly. Now, if you're not getting vaccinated and not wearing a mask, fuck you. I mean, you know, like, I respect your choice, certainly, but then you can do the minimum of other things.
For sure.
That wash your hands and
Bro, when I came back, I went to LA to visit my fiance's family, and when we came back, I took a 10-day quarantine because I had been traveling.
Right, absolutely. And that's what I was just thinking about that on the way over here. Is Crowley lived through the 1918 pandemic?
But feel me, like, cause I believe in vaccines. I have a hell of vaccines. Like,
I get it. It's just the timing. This one. No, I get you. I've had 3 doses and I'm not dead yet. I don't think I'm still.
I don't think it's even gonna kill you. I think it's a comply thing where they're like once.
No, I get that.
There's only
I do.
enough people who won't do it, then they can cut us out of society. You know.
Yeah.
So.
No, I get you. And I tend to. I've got my head. I've got things to do. Like, unless you're in a position to do something about those things, I think worrying about them is counterproductive. Like, some people are on a level that they might, like Stacey Abrams comes to mind. She might be governor of Georgia soon, and like be able to like do something. you
mean like with the voting, or?
Well, I mean. Being like, we all want to change the world. It's like the song goes, if we all want like a more equitable society, we all want to be left alone. We want people to be, I think most people are somewhat like normals, empathetic people are compassionate and don't want to see people living on the street, right? Like in the Reagan administration, we took money away from mental health services, and that's when sort of the homeless problem began, when we took all that money away of like, if you're schizophrenic, or if you're this or you're that, or you need help, there's money, there's services to help you. And we've gotten to the point where our only solution is, well, maybe you should just crash on the side of the highway. That's our fucking solution. It's just terrible. It's like late stage capitalism. It's a terrible solution. So does an average person know what to do about, like, would I want to do something about that? Like, I don't know what to do, and then I'm steeped in my own life and up to here taking care of all the responsibilities that I have to take up. So that's one of our problems, is that these Trump people are getting into like little like school boards and city councils and just like tiny bit like a road like stuff, because I don't understand why they want fascism. Like, it's so strange. People like fascism. They like it.
Let me wrap this around another weird way. Through this whole last 2 years, to challenge myself, started listening to some right-wing stuff, because I just was like, we hate these people so much.
Good thing. You should listen. You should.
We need to listen.
Absolutely.
Like to a whole hour-long show, like stomach it.
Oh, yeah.
And I found it's like, we kind of tell ourselves these stories about like, well, all these people like don't care or want to kill people or something. But it's like, I don't know, like, say that again. It's like, you think that half of the country like just wants to kill people? It's like, no, they don't. There's something else going on that we have to try and understand.
It's like a blood and soil thing. I heard something that Taylor Swift's fans are very ardent, and and she writes songs about her exes, and somebody DM'd John Mayer and said, you suck, you should die, fucker, fuck you. And he actually DM'd them back and said, do you really want me to die? And the person was like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, I didn't think that you were gonna read, right? So there's this facade of like, fuck you, fucker, die.
Yeah.
The real person is like, oh my god, like, I love you, John Mayer. Like, that's kind of like the something that we've allowed ourselves in this modern age is.
Like, we're so like, our whole thing is supposed to be tolerant and accepting, and then we've actually got some claws now. We're like, fuck all these people. And as I see that, I'm like, for my friends and family around me, I'm like, yo, I thought we were cool. Like, listen, I don't want to turn into them.
Well, right. Well, I mean, the thing that always gets me is certainty. If you're really certain about what you're doing, then there's probably something wrong with you. Hitler was really certain about what he was doing. If there's not some sort of questioning, and there's then where the narcissism comes in, is a person might be sick and they might not be able to question what. And there's a weird thing about narcissism is it's I've been looking into it a lot lately, and it's not something that can be medicated. It's like being bald. It's just something that humans are. Like you can't, and we need them. Like there's yeah, right, where you have a genetic predisposition, and then you're setting, your family life brings it. And so the get back to the 60s, the Timothy Leary, when he got fired from Harvard, he did whatever Timothy Leary is. He was involved with these people in Laguna Beach called the League of Spiritual Discovery. And they were acid dealers, and they made and sold acid. And Timothy Leary was like, they'd hang out, and they'd go out in the Laguna Hills and trip and stuff. And I mean, it must have been fucking pretty idyllic. And at a certain point, this guy shows up. I wish I could remember this guy's name. He's a very famous guy, because he's like one of these intelligence, like, he speaks 10 languages. He never looks the same in any photograph. He was here. He was there. He was in Beirut when this happened. He was, he's one of these guys that's an intelligence agent. But does he work for the CIA? Does he work for like European? Who even knows? He shows up on their doorstep and he's all, "Hey, you guys, I have like a pound of crystal LSD." Plonk. This is made by the government, probably, right, whatever. And they're like, "Hey, you guys want to go into business with me?" And so once they do that, oh fuck yeah, let's shake hands. Then the government knows what they're doing and where they're going and he ends up in prison because the intelligence community and LSD, like they already knew. They were probably laughing at all these fucking kids.
Watching them grow.
It's like the Grateful Dead is like the vanguard of all the fucking bad drugs we're gonna try. Like fucking here, let's give the Grateful Dead coke. Here, let's give the Grateful Dead MDMA. Let's give the Grateful Dead this weird smokable form of heroin that's super pure. You have to mix with cocaine. Oh, let's give the fucking Grateful Dead crack. Who was doing crack before anybody else in like 1975? The Grateful Dead. They were doing crack, right? I'm sure they were there's intelligence people taking notes on what it's doing to them and what their plans are to fuck up the black community 10 years from now. When we get ready, we're going to release this into, the minority communities and just, watch the dollars roll in because crack is what it is,
And when you listen to that early 80s hip hop and shit too, those guys, they didn't, like the drug dealers, they didn't use,
yeah, like Biggie. I heard an interview with him, and he wasn't smoking fucking crack because you've got to be it takes so much energy to just be a crack addict. It's exhausting.
It's your whole life.
It's like that thing I always say about alcoholics. Alcoholics should get a medal for being extra because any alcoholics that's doing their job, they're spending so much extra being an alcoholic. Like, I'm gonna get up, go to work. I'm gonna,
hide my drinking.
Yeah, right. I'm gonna put the bottle of whiskey in the toilet, the thing to like in the movie or whatever. And it's funny how like the '90s, I don't know, like the whole psychedelic thing. When I was in the '80s, you could still get good acid. It wasn't really a thing so much. The Dead was very kind of low key, and the 90s seems to be like the last hurrah of like psychedelic culture or whatever. There's all these kids who were being professional musicians who had loved the stuff in the 60s and wanted to emulate it, but it's always lesser. The Long Fathers always do it better. Oh, cool. All right. The fucking, it's hard being a psychonaut. It is. It takes a lot when you have to learn how to trip, and like sometimes like that therapy thing. Like if you've got unresolved issues, you take a big dose of LSD.
Bro, honestly, I haven't tripped in 8 years or 10 years.
Because you're like, oh my god.
Because honestly, like when the first time I tripped, it blew my shit open, and I was happy to be open. But then, and I did a couple times after that, but it never really still was like the same as the first like mind opening, because you can only get so open,
Well, I think that there's a thing that I saw thing about Funkadelic, which is one of the sort of the other band aside from the Allman Brothers that would just sit and like fucking trip and play and trip and play and trip and play. And George Clinton said that after 10 years, like acid like didn't work for him anymore. It just wasn't like, and I think Jerry, like 65, 75 is when he started like doing like heroin, like
it's because the acid got
that
bad?
10, well no, it's just the 10 years like you get bored, or you've been there, you've done that, you've seen like all there is to see. Me, I like to just eat mushrooms and then paint, you know, and just like be in the moment. Like it's, you know, I'm not on a journey of discovery, you know. I just, it's pretty and it's beautiful and it makes you feel good. And, you know, like there's nothing sort of more ideological about it. But when a person is first exposed to psychedelics, it's like that thing that the CIA, it's like, oh my God, like, what is this could be something, this could be used for something.
There's another world out there.
There's another world out there, right? And you know, that's why the Grateful Dead is special, because they spent like a lot of time tripping in front of an audience,
exploring the world
and improvising, which is incredibly difficult to do. I mean, just, like, talk about making it extra hard for yourself. It's like these fucking people in the 70s, they'd be like, let's get some studio time, which is like fucking $100 an hour or whatever. Let's get a bunch of drugs and go into the studio and do drugs in the studio, and then something will just happen. We'll just write some stuff.
They were shaman.
Like,
those guys,
truly,
you know what I mean?
We'll talk about being a magician. I mean, you know, the whole idea of like buying fame, status, fortune, you know, a legend, a legacy with your fucking brain and your guitar or whatever, you know, your piano or whatever it is, that you fucking have some, you know, thing that is an arcane thing that most people can't even, you know, most people would like to be musicians, but it takes a tremendous amount of work. It's like occultism, you know, it's tremendous. Even to be a Christian, it's a tremendous amount of work. You know, to be, you know, to be conscientious and to do the Bible studies and then go to church and do all the things that you need to do, you know, and have a community, you know.
Being hip to the culture and reading books and like all the other stuff that it takes to like be a fucking human artist, you know?
Oh yeah, it truly is you know, it's like a juggling act, you know, where it's like a magic trick. And music, you know, when you see Anderson .Paak or somebody that's like a genius, you know, you're you know, you're put into a state of what Joyce calls ascetic arrest, where you're not drawn in. Ooh, I want that, and you're not repelled. That's fucking gross, right? You're in this place where you're just like, you're in a place where true art, what he calls proper art, puts you in that state, right? It's where he calls like pornography and there's pornographic art and didactic art. Like all advertisers are didactic pornographers because they're like, don't smoke, like, you know, or have beer, you know. They want you to exactly. They want to draw you in or they want to repel you. They don't want to give you a piece of art that's just gonna put you in the state of meditation where you're not.
It's like awe, you know.
Right, where you're not projecting into the future an idealized self, and you're not thinking about and regretting the past. You're just here and now, right? Which is basically a huge, like, if you could do that, you can call yourself a magician, like, without having studied anything, you know, what they call mindfulness nowadays, you know, or you're just being in the here and now. And if you could truly do that, it's a skill. It's a definite skill. Or like meditating for 5 minutes. It's hard work in coal mining. Nobody wants to. Like, you would rather be doing anything that set you to work meditating after like 15 seconds. You're like, damn, I got some laundry that I need to do. Or like, I can clean the kitchen.
Yeah, let me clean the bathroom. Is there anything else I can do?
Go outside in the rain and put the grid on the treads of my car. Yeah.
But honestly, I use that to my advantage sometimes. Because I'll, like, you know what I mean? When it makes something I didn't want to do sound better, you know?
Absolutely. There's a book for anyone who's interested called Magic in Theory and Practice, and if you're interested in Crowley's sort of thing, that's a good place to start. There's a book called Book of Lies that's a little bit harder to read, but it's pretty fun. All Crowley is hard to like. It's just like, it's crazy how we don't put our brains to that type of reading unless you're sort of a religious person. Like, most secular people don't like think about the sacred or how to make their life sacred, or you know, because it's basically what is carving a sacred space for yourself. That's why tarot is good. It's like it's something to keep your, you know,
hand in the game or whatever.
It's a physical thing.
When you want to be spiritual, it's like, what do I do? You know, like meditation's a great place to start, but like a lot of people like don't know where to start or what to do. And that's a great place to start, is just mindfulness. And of course, tarot is the best. You know, that's the sort of yoga of the West. That's that's the most efficient way to teach everything. And it's supposedly talk about a made up story. The story of tarot is that the church was going after all the people that knew this knowledge and stuff, and so they figured out a way to fuse all this magical, kabbalistical, Greek and Latin and Hebrew sort of strains all together in this symbolic language that you can, you know,
like
if any sort of authorities look at it, it's like, this is my card game I gamble with, you know. It doesn't have any like occult secrets that I teach people. And so you're like a traveling whatever troubadour. You come during the day, you do your gambling thing, and at night you meet in the secret meeting place and you show people, like, you teach people the, you know, special thing. The cards really are like a magical, how the people's fascination with cards even to this day. And cards sort of appeared in early 1300s. There's like 3 or 4 rich Italian families that have these tarot decks, these 78 card decks, and inside of 20 years, every person in Europe had a deck of cards. Like, it was just an explosion. And you know, the tarot cards represent the cosmic stuff, and the 52 card deck is like the time in the year. There's 52 weeks in the year. There's 13 weeks in a season, right? There's 13. There's 91 pips in a suit, and there's 91 days in a season. There's 4 suits and 4 seasons. And there's 365 pips plus the Joker. There's 365. And so that's a big, like, tarot is a huge part of, you know, occult theology or whatever. It's not really theology. It's more like alchemy, where it's a way of transcending, like we were talking about, transcending. That's why alchemy works in, like, Christians and Islam and Judaism all practice alchemy, like, no problem. It fits into all of them because it's not spiritual dogma. It's like about gnosis, you know, about like knowing something directly. Like, that's why early Christians don't like Gnostics, because if you know something directly, you can show up and say, Jesus just spoke to me and he said we're going to do all this crazy shit. And if you get some followers, you know.
No.
Exactly.
Jesus speaks to this guy only.
There's this guy Arius who was like the last sort of heresy, and he postulated that Christ was a creature. Like, he's not the Son of God. He is the Son of God, but he's a creature. He's like you and me. He's like a bear. He's a creature. And he uses this word, and it was this huge to-do for like years and years and years, until they finally had the Council of Nicaea, and they invented this creed. They say light from light, God from God, true God from true God. Where they're saying that Jesus is not begotten or made. He's one in being with the Father. He is the Father, but after another fashion, right? And which shuts down all of this creature talk, right? Because you get into some sticky issues when you do the creature thing. And you know, the type of Christianity that became like sort of the Roman Christianity was the most conservative, most orthodox type of Christianity that was around at that time, of course, which is Murphy's Law, because those are the toughest, most psychotic people. Yeah. You know, you always get the toughest, you know. Like, I've been watching this show about Times Square in the 70s, and, you know, and it's just like sharks. No, prostitutes and pimps and mafia and, like, you know, like predatory people preying on people and stuff. And you always get that in the spiritual world, you know, that you have to watch out, because, you know, when you get involved with things, like, you don't know what's on the up and up and what's, you know, kosher or whatever. And there's the Bhagwan Rajneesh, and there's the Scientology, and all these crazy, you know, things that people get super invested in, and they do. And they do. It's the brainwashing thing. That's the thread that I lost, is the Jack Parsons guy. L. Ron Hubbard was friends with Jack Parsons, so much so that he stole his wife and his boat. Stole his boat, hanging out there doing the Aleister Crowley party thing because L. Ron Hubbard was into Aleister Crowley, and because he was a psychopath, he stole the girl and the boat. And while they were on the boat, this woman, I can't remember what her name is, Sue something, she read him Alfred Korzybski's Science and Sanity, which is all about mind control. I mean, in a big fucking way. It's the guy who invented general semantics, and that's a whole other story. But he basically cribbed Dianetics from this book, Science and Sanity, and he uses mind control techniques, and occult techniques. Supposedly, at the highest level of Scientology, you're given a copy of the Book of the Law, Crowley's book, or whatever, and they reveal that it's all just this occult sort of satanic, thing.
They're not saying satanic, but like just ideal.
Yeah, well, it's satanic in the sense of like glorifying the self and the pleasures, carnal pleasures, and sort of being transgressive. I mean, real Satanists, again, it's so conservative. Satanists, if you're a real Satanist, what are you doing? Sitting around doing rituals? It's all very sort of like geeky and tame, and you look at a guy like, there's another occult link, that stupid Marilyn Manson guy. There's a guy that is clearly mentally ill, but he's wants to be one of these, there's a guy that's probably read some Crowley here and there and studied a little magic, but he's a narcissistic psychopath, so he's unable to, pull off the recent shenanigans that he got into. But he tried to use the sort of occult mystique. Trent Reznor as well, did his little thing, and Marilyn Manson came and sucked all the Satan out of the room, and Trent Reznor just disappeared. Remember that? No. It was in the 90s.
Was it like
Trent Reznor was kind of like the like edgy occult guy for a second there.
I feel you, but because he was doing like like soundtracks.
I wanna fuck you like an animal.
Yeah,
no, this is when he had his what is this fucking thing called? 9 Inch Nails.
Yeah.
When he had his band and stuff.
I never really thought of them on the same path, but I feel you. They're both just that kind of,
Right. Well, where you're using, it's like the fucking classic is Black Sabbath. Black Sabbath is a very competent English blues band, rock band, and they're fucking going around London, and nobody gives a fucking flying crap about what they're doing. And so they have a meeting in desperation. Well, what can we do? Like, we gotta stand out. We gotta do something to be like special. Maybe we should be witches. We'll pretend like it's a black mass, and like if you do the first Black Sabbath album, it like opens up and there's this sort of prose thing about the witches, black, I don't fucking know. It's just a bunch of crap they threw together, and it worked, right? It worked. People are like, oh, these guys are like witches in a cult. They're singing about Lucifer and stuff, and they scored, right? It's a marketing fucking gimmick, which is most sort of posturing, occult posturing is a marketing gimmick. It's like Bowie, bless his heart, he wasn't gay. He said that he was gay, but he was, doing cultural appropriation. He just was, He was getting the mystique and the coolness of being gay, And there's a scene in whatever book that I read where he, they're out after hours and they go to the gay bar and he's like intentionally dancing, so that everyone will see him. And then he goes in the magazine, like some, I don't know, British magazine in the 70s, and he announces that he's gay, It's like, ooh, he's gay. Like, I totally want to go to see that show. Which is funny because Elton John did the same thing, and I remember I was a little kid and he came out in 76, and nobody reacted well to it. They didn't want him. It was okay for Bowie, but it wasn't okay for Elton for some reason. Elton had to go back into the closet. I'm kidding. I was just kidding, guys. I'm sorry. So it's the thing where even Crowley's whole thing is like it's a marketing gimmick. You use the razzmatazz and the smoke and mirrors. That's all part of it.
It's hilarious.
If you want to, well, it's very like solitary, like a real magician. You just won't hear. A lot of these guys are authors, but like people who are alchemists, like it takes a lot to be an alchemist. It takes a lot, like psychologically and like monetarily, just to buy the books, and not to mention the oven and all the fucking glass and the weird chemical stuff you gotta have to actually do alchemy. Like, it's something that, you know, there isn't actually an Alchemy for Dummies book, but the real thing, people don't talk about, you know, it's like DMT. It's like, I don't think I ever heard Jerry once talk about DMT, because it's too profound, it's too scary, it's too spiritual. What can you say?
Well, it's like
you know?
If you meet somebody who's a Rosicrucian, they're not.
Anyone who claims to be a Rosicrucian, like there's an actual American order that's called the Rosicrucians. That ain't it. You know, like there is no Rosicrucians. It's these guys who wrote this thing, and they had a message. It was a lot of this is about Protestantism. It's about, we're Protestants now. We don't have to kowtow to the Pope, but we have this knowledge. We have this sacred knowledge, right, that we're able to talk about now because we're not Pope people anymore. Because the Pope was the one that's like, I have I don't want any competing brands. You know, there's only one brand. It's like Standard Oil. There's only one type of oil that you can buy, and that's Standard Oil. You know, you want to complain about it, talk to God, because this was all set up long before you were born, and we've got it down to a science. Just sit in the pew and shut up. Oh yeah, by the way, need a little extra. It's like
God would be pleased if you would.
Yeah, right. It's the George Carlin thing. You know, God is
always
God,
needs a little money.
That's right. He's all powerful, all knowing.
Just not good money.
Just needs a little, need a little extra. There's that story in the Bible of the widow's mite where it's talk about brainwashing. They're saying this a poor person who only has a penny. And they give their penny. They're telling the poor people that only have a penny that we should have your penny. But then you're going to be set up like later on down the road. We're going to have a real nice place for you. It's going to have virgins and good food and hash to smoke. It's going to be lovely. You know,
it's going to be lovely.
It will. You're going to have houris. I'm not really sure what the deal is in the Quran about, because everyone's always confused about the virgins or the number of virgins. But I think that there's a setup.
Yeah.
I've never read the Quran, but I think there's a setup. They're telling you like when you get to heaven, everything's going to be great, and that's always the problem when we get into those realms, you know, because
Well, the people who are telling you that also aren't living by those means themselves. They're taking what you have now so they can live now, and then telling you it's like a spirit creditor.
It was like Jewish theology is it's a scam by the Levite priests, because the Levite priests run the fucking temple, and you have to come and bring your like livestock or whatever to donate to the temple as your tithe. Who eats those? The fucking priests eat them, right? They get them for free.
There's always been hustlers. You know?
That's right. It's a scam. I mean, Islam, which is a great and true religion. Don't get me wrong, but it's a marketing scam. It's a tourism scam. You have to go to Mecca if you're able to. As a Muslim, every Muslim has to go to Mecca. And you have to spend money when you go there. Yeah. It's not. I mean, the people that live in Mecca every year, 1 million people come and empty their pockets in Mecca and then go home. It's just like a casino. I love, and the Christians had the same sort of thing where you have all these different shrines, and if you had the means, you would travel and you'd go on this pilgrimage way and you'd go to that shrine and do whatever you did at the shrine. There's always a bit of the huckster, when you get into religion.
But that's what's so funny is, and then, taking it back to kind of like psychedelics and musicians, because like for us, and that's why I wanted to talk to you too, is because like I recognized open mic when I met you 10 years ago. I was like, it wasn't even your music, but I was like, this guy has the muse. The muse hangs out with this guy. You know what I mean?
Well, I thank you.
And so it's just like, when people like us, we look at religion, someone's telling us how to do it, you're like, I have a relationship with the muse. You know what I mean? You're like, don't tell me, I ain't giving you money. I ain't giving you shit.
Well, and that's a special place that artists have in the modern world, too, is we get to be like sort of shamans that interpret, things for people, because most people are stupid and they're lost, they're brainwashed, and they don't have the wherewithal to be an artist and make a statement. and those people that do are sort of special in our society.
We're just lucky.
And, well, even the ability to play music, the fact that nobody's ever like listened to my music or whatever, like just to play music brings you a joy and a satisfaction that's like, I kind of can't think of anything else that does that for you.
Imagine life without that thing.
God, since I haven't been able to play, I've just been listening like a fiend
but at least you can
to everything.
I've
been listening to everything like a fiend. Absolutely. Getting back into my jazz thing a little bit. I've discovered jazz isn't as fun to listen to as pop. It just isn't. It just
it's
isn't.
different. It's different.
It's different, but it takes more mental wherewithal.
Jazz for me to like get like a jazzgasm, I gotta like it happens halfway through the song. You know, you're like following along, and then all of a sudden someone will just do a backflip, and you're like, oh damn, oh nice, you know. But like you gotta really be following every little movement, and then all of a sudden something will happen.
It takes more effort. It certainly takes more effort to be into jazz. And well, it's the thing. Who's into occultism in jazz? Like I can't. Well, Coltrane certainly is the guy who's the big spiritual guy who studied everything.
But again, going back, like once he took acid, his music stopped having notes in it.
It became very strange,
which is cool. And and he had played all the notes enough times that he can do that.
Yep, absolutely.
But yeah, it was interesting. It's like, again, going back to one of those people, it's like McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane, their chords together, like, made a special, they opened a realm, a special realm. And so to even go to John Coltrane, and I think he was Christian, honestly, but like, if you go to him and tell him like, oh, well, you got to think this, or dogma this, or that, you know what I mean? It's like, this man, like, opened a fourth dimensional space.
Oh yeah, I read some stuff that he studied and read everything like Hinduism, Buddhism, like Christian theology. Like he had his hand, which you kind of do as if you come as a modern person to the stuff. You are like a dilettante. You're a picker and chooser. You have a little bit of this and a little bit of that because you don't have to. I mean, it's kind of joy because of so many hundreds of years. You had to be on the DL with this stuff. Like, you will be put in prison, you'll be put on a stake and burned alive for, thinking about this kind of stuff. Yeah. So, it's a wonderful thing in our modern age that if you want to learn about the corpus hermeticum and become a magician, like, the way is open for you. You used to have to, like walk hundreds of miles to find a teacher, if you could find one. There's this guy, Abramelin the Mage, or Abraham the Jew, and he went, supposedly he wrote this book, and he went and traveled until he found somebody that knew how to do magic. He had to go to Egypt, right? Exactly. He had to go to Egypt.
You can't just walk up into every town and be like, I'm looking for the magician.
That's right. I'm looking for somebody that could teach me how to do high magic, how to do, like the thing. It's like, well, it's a very strange thing about the Hebrewness of Kabbalah, right? It's like a modern magician, you can decide, like, I'm going to invoke Greek gods, and like I'm going invoking Diana because Diana is just, Artemis is just, they all align. You can find in whatever pantheon and align that same sort of god. But like the Jewish magicians, they were Jewish. It's a weird thing. Like they only have one god, and it's an invisible god, but they have all these hundreds and hundreds of like spiritual entities. They can't call them gods, they're angels in that sort of, or they're demons or archangels or something like that. And I don't know, as somebody that's been into Kabbalah like my whole life, you are somewhat of a trespasser, in this, thing that's very Jewish. Like, it's so much so that, there's sort of Jewish Kabbalah and there's WASP Kabbalah. There's, the Golden Dawn is like WASP Kabbalah, where we take, all of the sort of magical, what they call practical magic, all the fun stuff where you're invoking demons or whatever, and all the spicy stuff. And we take that out and leave all the sort of, dogma, So that's the problem with Christians, is they flippin' cherry pick stuff out of the Old Testament. You can't motherfucking do that, because Jesus abrogated all of the laws in the Old Testament. He says there's only 2 laws. You love your God with all your heart and all your soul, and you love your neighbor as yourself. 2 laws. And so if you're going to say that homosexuals is an abomination, then you got to put on your little stringy thing, and you got to eat kosher, and you got to fucking get circumcised. And don't tell me that you're not going to accept the immigrant, which is expressly said you have to accept the immigrant and give him stuff and feed him and, you know, clothe him or whatever. Oh my God, you go on about immigrants in the Bible. Yeah. You find a whole bunch of stuff to make people mad.
No.
So you know, it's a sticky wicket. It just is, you know, like. It's just what my mom used to call a can of worms. Yeah. You know, you open it, it's just fucking, oh fuck, now I have like all these worms I gotta pick up.
Well, man, we should do another one of these. I think we should.
Okay,
do,
cool.
You know, at some point.
All right.
I feel like we have so much to talk about. You know?
Absolutely. All right, cool. Then let's call it right now. That was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah. You man, I mean, we've talked about this stuff for years, but I'm still taken back at how knowledgeable you are on this.
Thank you.
3, 2, 1, 0. Ignition.